Hey, welcome back to another episode of Ecommerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba. I'm your host, Nathan Resnick, joined by my co-host, Aaron Alpeter. So today we have Huckberry, which I heard about, I think, in the kind of early 2010s. And as I was doing my research, I was amazed to see that they are a, nine-figure revenue brand. I mean, pretty remarkable, pretty incredible. So today we're going to dive into their founding story, their supply chain, what makes them who they are, and then also their exit potential. So I'm pretty excited. But before we dive in, there was a few kind of interesting tidbits that caught my eye. I'm sure there's stuff that caught your eye too. For me, I saw Outerwear. They hit a $5 billion valuation. So they received a $75 million round from Dexcom. And the company is now profitable. They're expected to double revenue to $500 million this year. So they raised at a 10x multiple, which is pretty incredible. And they just signed a $96 million contract with the Department of Defense to equip some of their workforce. And I mean, you think about this in comparison with like Apple Watch, right? Can you guess, I mean, just off the top of your head, and even for our listeners too, how much revenue do you think Apple Watch does?
More than 500 million.
Yeah, $37 billion. It's insane.
Wow.
So if you compare Oura Ring to Apple Watch, obviously there's a huge growth potential there, but I think they're, hitting all strides. I've heard great, feedback from friends on the product. I've thought about getting one. It's just pretty incredible, I think.
Yeah, and we might have to go back and reprise the episode that we did a few months ago about Oura Ring, because I think at that point my takeaway was they were kind of on their way to dying. They weren't profitable. They were having all this backlash, but kudos to the management team who really turned it around, and now they're profitable. They control their own destiny, and they've still got a long way to catch Apple, and who knows if they will, but they are certainly a going concern now.
Yeah, definitely. What caught your eye this week?
So I couldn't believe that this was true, but Pokemon Go. Do you remember Pokemon Go a couple years ago?
Yeah.
Was this huge thing that happened?
Yeah.
So turns out that Pokemon Go was just a sneaky way for a company to collect data to build a navigation app. And so it came out that Niantic, who's the developer, announced that they were basically harvesting all of this geo data from Pokemon Go to build a mapping tool. And so you have all these people literally walking around their cell phones, looking at buildings, looking at areas, and they were harvesting all of this data. And when they said, hey, we need to map this particular area because we need to figure out how we're going to get this product, they would just drop a Pokemon over there, and people would walk over, and you'd get dozens of people looking at it from all different angles. And they're like, okay, let's go over here and let's do this one. And so that's literally how they had people build a massive data set around geofencing and geomapping for free. And in fact, people paid to buy Pokeballs and stuff in the game. And so in many cases, like, they made money building it. So I was both kind of alarmed and impressed at the same time, where this was just so brilliant that they're like, yeah, you signed these terms and conditions for a reason, and they're going to use your data to do other stuff. And now they've got this huge corpus of first party data that they're building a business off of.
That's wild. Yeah, I had no clue. So did they say their mapping product is live yet, or that they're just building it? They announced they're building it.
I didn't get that far in the article, but I think it's launching in the next year or so.
Wow, that is crazy. That is so wild. That's amazing. Wow, that's super smart. And I wonder. I don't know. I'm just curious if this was like foresight where they planned this, or at hindsight where they're like, hey, we have all this data, we should do something with it. What product can we launch? I don't know.
They're either really lucky or really smart, or a mix of both. But I think Pokemon Go's been around for like 10 years. So
Yeah.
they either were playing a massive long game or stumbled onto this treasure trove.
Yeah, pretty incredible. And I also saw this week the Izba team launched Slotted. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So Izba Group is a collection of supply chain tech and supply chain service companies. And we launched our fourth company, which was Slotted. And it's a collaborative RFP tool that helps brands and 3PLs find and evaluate one another. So this has been a labor of love for the last couple of years, but really the last 6 months or so. And we're just excited to have it out in the wild. So free for brands to go out and find a 3PL. So go on there. We've got the internet's largest open database of locations, about 2,200 all around the world. Go through, build your RFP, and start talking to 3PLs.
It's awesome. I love it. I think it's going to be a huge benefit for so many different brands. And yeah, check it out. Slotted if you're, exploring an RFP for a 3PL or want to, see how your 3PL is performing. I definitely recommend checking it out. I've been on the site. I think it was really well done. So hats off to you and the Izba team.
Yeah, absolutely. It's slotted.com for those of you who are interested.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's dive in here. So Huckberry, it's, for those that don't know, it's kind of originally started as like a trench coat brand, think about like W1 battlefields or fashion runways or, unique things like that. But what's funny is that it was started by two finance guys. So they kind of ditched the spreadsheets for modern day adventures in men's apparel. And they've really grown this into a pretty incredible brand. And I think to kind of kick things off here, as I was thinking about, just fashion and apparel in general, I was kind of wondering to myself, like, how many coats do I own? Because I live, in Utah, obviously. So go skiing a lot. How often do I buy coats? And for me, like, I guess I probably have, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe 10 coats. So
Wow.
quite a bit, probably more than most people. But I think partially it's because I have like 2 or 3 ski jackets that sometimes I like to rotate through. And then I have, different jackets that I wear, out to dinner or something. So I think, it's, yeah, different coats for different occasions, right?
Yeah. Have you been up skiing yet?
Not yet. I need to go. This weekend is the plan, but the base is super low, so we'll see.
Gotcha. Gotcha. How often do you think about like your coat when you're making your outfit together? Do you even think about your outfit? Is it you get dressed, you're like this shirt, and knowing you probably spend more
Uh,
time thinking about your sneakers.
I mean, yeah, mostly thinking about the sneakers. I think, I mean, I don't think about it too much. I guess I have some like basic coats that like could go over anything, right? So I think that's kind of, I have like generalist kind of coats and some that I like that are more comfy than others, right?
Yeah, I'm very much the same way. I recently got a new coat from Costco, and it was like Canada's very cold from what we hear, and so we're like, I need to get a new coat. So it's more of this like kind of ski jacket esque sort of thing, but more of just an everyday coat. But I put like zero thought into this. It's like I'll think about my shirt and how I do my hair or whatever, and then it'll be more of a all right, let's just take the coat and go. So I don't really think a whole lot about it.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, I think as I was reviewing for this episode, the history of kind of outerwear is pretty unique. So I think that'd be a good starting point.
Yeah, and I think it really comes back to our experience as well, where people don't think a whole lot about it. It's really been a very practical thing for a long time. And so you think about, early America, the outerwear that people were wearing was just practical stuff. It was coat skins, it was cloaks, it was capes, those sorts of things to kind of help people feel good. So you think about like a movie like the Reverend, right? You got Leo in that fur coat. That's basically what they had. Is they said, the point of this thing is to keep me alive in the cold, and so that's what's going to do. And eventually, you start to see like military style coats be created, and they were more utilitarian. They wanted to look a little bit better because you wanted everybody to look the same. You start to see leather jackets that the Native Americans would have. So you're kind of refining some of these animal skins that you come through. And really, the thought is that really in the early 20th century, you start to see the development of what I would say modern outerwear. And the first kind of trend was around a motoring coat. So you think most cars didn't have windows. You think Model T, you had a lot of wind coming through. And so people were wearing coats that were waterproof. They were very heavy duty materials. And this was really kind of starting in the 1900s. And then after World War I, you had a lot of folks coming back from the war, and they had trench coats. And so that became a little bit more popular thing. Although it's funny, I think of like a trench coat, I think back to like Wild West, and people are, having the standoff in the town square. But that neither here nor there. Fast forward a little bit, Great Depression, World War II, really the outerwear starts to shift to being more practical and utilitarian. So you get rid of some of the aesthetic that people had. After the war, you see like bomber jackets and really a lot of military surplus that comes on board. So people start to wear pea coats. They start to wear things that were on ships or things that were in trenches. And that was really the focus was, these things were warm. They were very practical. The military used them. They had a lot of them. And so they just sold them to the population. In the 60s and 70s, like so many other things, there was a huge change and shift in what people wanted. And so you start to see people become more expressive about the outerwear choices they have. And so you see denim jackets, leather biker jackets, faux fur, those sorts of things where people were more bold and colorful. And your jacket or your outerwear was really part of your outfit versus this thing that was keeping you alive. And if you look kind of this modern era that we're in, really 1980s to present, this has been really a focus on synthetic materials. And so, finding moisture wicking fibers, finding things that keep you warm in extreme cold, or in some cases, lots of rain, things like that. This is where you see North Face, Patagonia, those sorts of things. And so I think it's really interesting to look at how in this particular apparel category, so much has been predicated by what was practical for your environment. And it used to be just practical for what kept you alive, what you could find, what was practical because of what was left over from the military. And now it's shifting more into fashion. And there are a lot of brands today that really lean into this aesthetic of, hey, we're going to talk to you about being a polar explorer. We know that you've never been, north of the U.S., but we're going to talk to you and market to you as if you're Ernest Shackleton and you're going to go out and do these sorts of things. And so it's really interesting how we're now starting to see this little bit of fashion, although you can make this argument that the focus is still very much on being practical, but it's more as an aspirational practicality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think too, like depending on how you wear your jacket for what occasion, there's different things that these brands will do to make them stick out, right? For like ski jackets, for example, they have zippers in certain places. They have some hand warmer pockets. They've really kind of thought through what's gonna make this incredible jacket for skiing, right? And I feel like from a fashion standpoint, people probably from a design standpoint look into, okay, we want to put the pockets here. This color's in this season. There's a lot that has gone into it, but it is interesting to see how this has changed from, like you said, originally just being practical and to keep you warm to now, hey, your jacket and coat is pretty much a fashion statement, right?
Yeah, and the manufacturing process has become so complex and so specialized that most brands don't even bother trying to manufacture themselves. There are large factories that have gotten very good, either good at working with a particular material, whether it's wool or nylon or some of these proprietary chemicals like Gore-Tex. And so you're right, these brands really are designers, but it's more selling this aesthetic. And Huckberry kind of falls into that category of mostly not producing their own stuff. And question for you is just if you're a brand that has a factory that's making all of your competitor stuff, how do you stand out? Like, how do you actually differentiate yourself if you're not manufacturing your own products?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it comes down to the content and kind of aspirational type of vibe that you put out there, right? Whether it be like the North Face and, you see videos of them, on mountaintops around the world, or whether it be like Patagonia and just, really connecting with that vibe of, kind of let my people go surf and this whole outdoor adventure type of mantra that they have. And so, I think it really depends like what you aspire to. I think it's rare, but you do see some like upstart, ski jacket brands when I'm, at these different ski shops and stuff. And usually they have like pretty unique, like out of the box colors, which I kind of enjoy. And so, I think in some cases, you've got to stand out in different ways, right? That could be from a community standpoint, that could be from a colorway standpoint, that could be, relating to a certain aesthetic. So, I mean, I think, like you were saying, the manufacturing of these, outerwear products isn't really that much different from, brands, but from a marketing and kind of aspirational standpoint, it is very different, I would say.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point because you almost have to go out and build the audience and really build your niche before you can even try to market them. And I think back to a couple other companies in this space or in adjacent spaces. Like Gear Patrol, they were an online magazine that turned into e-commerce, and they were reviewing, men's lifestyle products, and then decided to start selling some of those items directly. Hypebeast obviously is a streetwear blog that started doing e-commerce stuff. Goop, you can't forget about Gwyneth Paltrow and kind of building her following and her unique take on things, and then eventually turning that into a business. You've started lots of companies as well. How do you think about building that audience before you go out and release the product.
Yeah, I mean, I think today in e-commerce, community is everything, right? So if you can connect with a community, if you can connect with creators and really, use that aesthetic to build your brand around, I think it's a huge unlock. I think what's interesting in Huckberry's case, they started in 2010 and they didn't really have any of that, right? I mean, so the company was founded by Andrew Forch and Richard Grenier. Andrew has a background in finance, went to University of Virginia, spent some time at JP Morgan Chase and at Greenhill, and, met Richard at an event where they were the only two wearing suits. So Richard, has a background in finance as well, went to Villanova, was at Credit Suisse, and, they met at this event and they were the only two that were wearing suits, and they kind of, I think, connected from that and became
They're an
buddies right
embarrassment.
away. Yeah, and they kept talking about different ideas, right? And so, I think they both realized coming from a finance background that their life, was going to be spreadsheets for 90 hours each week the rest of their lives, and they didn't want that, right? And so, I mean, they wanted to find a way to kind of get out of that spreadsheet life, if you will. And so I think they would just continue to discuss this idea after work for quite some time. They both kind of envisioned a brand that was kind of equal parts store, magazine, and inspiration. And for them as kind of 25-year-old guys at the time who were living in the city, but lived for adventure, there was nothing that really resonated and spoke to them directly. As Richard says, there was like basically you could find plenty of high-end design products that hardly anyone could afford, but there wasn't really any like hardcore performance gear that would get you out and about. And the options in between for regular active guys were pretty limited from their viewpoint. So they set out to start Huckberry with kind of a ideal customer profile of like men 25 to 40 years old looking for quality gear. And I think what's super inspirational for this brand is you talk about the initial investment of what it takes to get started. I mean, both they just put in $10,000 each, so the company started with 20K, and as we get into the financials in terms of how they've
A
grown
lot.
to nine-figure revenue brand, it is pretty incredible. And neither of them had any experience in retail nor entrepreneurship. And I think, as they look back on the story, one of the hardest parts was, summering up the courage to take the leap. But after you figure that out, it's really just part of the ride. So I think it's just pretty incredible. I'm excited to really dive into the story. And I always wondered like where they got the name, right? Huckberry. And you're familiar with Mark Twain, I'm sure, and there's Huckleberry Finn in the book, and they thought about the character was kind of the perfect totem for the spirit of adventure that they wanted the brand to embody. And Huckleberry was already registered and is actually an insurance company, but Huckberry was available for $9.98 on GoDaddy, and so that's where they bought their domain. So they started it literally with 20K and a $10 domain. I mean, it's pretty incredible, and I really love kind of the roots and honesty of this brand.
Yeah, as a supply chain guy, I always like to think a little bit and take appreciation for marketing and what branding could be. I mean, Huckleberry, like you said, is selling business insurance today. It was almost a clothing brand, but it could have been uh, a nutraceutical. It could have been a sports team. I mean, there's all these sorts of things that were there, and so it's really interesting. I mean, when we started Slotted, we were kind of looking for a name that was not known, right? You looked on Slotted, and there was nothing in the space that we wanted to compete with. There was really no space at all tied to Slotted, and so we kind of stuck with that and said, all right, let's try it. And so, I mean, we've been at it for a week, so we still got some time to kind of own that space. But I think it's just interesting how you think about Huckberry now and what it stands for and what it means. At the time that they bought the domain, it was nothing. It was worth $10, and now Huckberry means something in the eyes of consumers, and they would never think of it as something else. And so, I don't know. I just as a non-marketing guy, I just appreciate marketing sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and so their site went live before kind of the Shopify days, right? I mean, so the site launched in April 2021. One of their brothers did the coding, so it was a custom built site because Shopify wasn't really known to them. Um, and they had a year of savings in their bank accounts. No real plan B. they never considered, Huckberry not working out. And, as they say, they would go to trade shows with their business cards that they created themselves on Photoshop. And, most buyers would kind of laugh at them. And, they were hoping to get 2,000 people at launch, and they started with way less, but it was enough, right? And so, some buyers, decided to take the risk on them and just see what would happen, bringing their product. And I think it's just really kind of rooted in this mantra of, just get started, and just in your head, like, no, it's going to work out. I feel like that's really what, these founders thought, is they didn't have a plan B. They knew it was going to be challenging, but they knew it was going to work. And I think that was, really a key to their success.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting that I saw too is that they actually were leaning into this adventure motif so much that they had thought about selling adventure travel experiences. And so, it's weird to think of buying outerwear and then also buying a rock climbing uh, excursion, but that was kind of the idea they had. But that was an idea that was quickly shot down by their payment processor. Said, sure, you can do that, but you're going to have to take a huge down payment in order to process that type of transaction. And they talked about, this is like a Russian proverb as well, where you basically always throw away your first pancake. And so for them, they thought it was better to just start than trying to make it perfect. And so my question for you, Nathan, is at what point is it important to be thoughtful before you launch something versus just getting it out there and getting it started?
Yeah, I mean, I think this could be debated by entrepreneurs so much, right? I mean, I think on one hand, just getting started is such a key, and getting out there and getting market feedback is so important. There's that notion of MVP, but I think, like, really, as I've become more in tune, with my career as a founder, I think it's not necessarily like most viable product. It's, kind of most lovable product, right? Like, how do you get your
Mm.
product to a point that can resonate with some buyers that, at least a handful are going to buy, right? Because I think a lot of people, launch something that is just too bare bones, where it doesn't necessarily like make sense or connect enough with that audience. And so I do think you have to go a bit of like a step further to really, have a finite test. But I mean, I do think just getting started is such a key. And I think once you take that leap, you'll kind of be, addicted to entrepreneurship, if you will.
I like what you said there, and I agree with you. I think that it's important to get yourself out there, but at the same time, you've got to make sure that what you're building is something that's truly better than what's out there, not just different. I mean, how many times have you been pitched on a new supply chain tech idea and you're like, that's cool, but that looks like this program, or this looks like this with fewer features and not as big of a network. And so I think that the challenge of, do we wait and incubate and really make it well, or make it good, versus do we just get it out there and try to, it probably has to do with how competitive the environment is. Certainly if you're building something in AI today and it's about being better than what's out there, you could probably start with something that is pretty bare bones and just get out there and gain a following and gain some traction. But if you're going after planning software, for example, something that's had decades of investment and billions of dollars of investment that's gone into it, then you really have to do a lot of work just to get to be competitive. And so it's one of those things where part of it, I think, is understanding what your niche is. And if it's wide open, as long as you're better than an alternative and you're not just different, then by all means, get out there, build in public, do those sorts of things. But if you're working on something where there is a market, is established, then I think it's probably more important to hold back and make sure that what you've done is truly unique before you put it out there.
Yeah, I agree. And I resonated too. I mean, so when Huckberry was starting, they decided not to pursue any venture capital. As they say, they wanted to build on their own terms. They had obviously investment banking background, so they thought kind of taking money was unattractive to them. And they've seen businesses, ruined because they were pushed too much. And, as they say, quote unquote, if you raise money, you get pushed into a treadmill and someone else controls the button for it, which I thought was really a pretty great quote, honestly, as I was researching Huckberry. I mean, it is very true in some sense. And so, they really wanted to focus on their customers instead of growth. And I think that's really, what's enabled Huckberry to become a success, right? And so the company started turning a profit within 3 months, which I thought was pretty amazing. And it really became known for their storytelling skills, and they've been banking on that ever since, right? What do you think about that quote, real quick? Because I think we should touch on that. I think so many of the brands that we've covered in the past kind of start by raising capital and go on this treadmill of grow at all costs. And I just think that quote, I think we should just take a moment and discuss it for a second.
I love it. If you raise money, you get pushed into a treadmill and someone else controls the button for it. Absolutely true. And it's a question of, when you're choosing an investor, you have to trust that they are not going to push you too hard, right? And I think what happened with a lot of companies over the last 4 or 5 years is you spent so many years on a treadmill, and then the game changed and said, cool, now I want you to go squat 200 pounds or 400 pounds, whatever it is. And so that's the sort of thing where people weren't, they were playing a different game, and then suddenly the treadmill was completely different. And so it's really important to trust the people that are investing with you. And I think that even if you've got investors, just the path to profitability and owning that is so important to be able to manage that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, they were really bootstrapped, right? So to solve for warehousing and office space, they would go to the coffee shop that was between their apartments as their office. Their warehouse was their apartment. I mean, one of the founders mentions how his girlfriend wouldn't visit him because the boxes were all over the space in his apartment. And when they got their first quote unquote big warehouse, they I thought it was cool. They made sure to include a rock wall in the office, which would have been awesome. I would super enjoy that. That'd be super cool. And they would soon switch from to a small apartment in the San Francisco area, about 300 square feet, that included their bathroom, which was their office. So they grew on their own terms, which I think was pretty incredible. I mean, in some sense, kind of like the startup dream. And I mean, I'm curious, Aaron, have you had any experiences like this where you kind of hacked your way through the beginning stages of a startup or company?
Yeah, two come to mind. One with me directly, and then one with the client. When I was in college, I did one of those college painting things, and so that required buying a bunch of painting gear and buying stuff for a truck and all those sorts of things. And you had to house it somewhere, and so I still have painting supplies in my parents' garage today from over a decade ago. And so I think that was the first part where you're just kind of making do with what you've got. There's no room to buy space or do those sorts of things. So that was one that I had personally. And then I'll always remember helping launch a company in Brooklyn, and they had rented an office for them, but then they also had like a second room, and that's our warehouse. And so one of the things that we did was go through and try to lay out the quote unquote warehouse with some sort of methodology. And so we put tape on the floor and said, okay, this is your long-term storage. Don't touch this. And, this is where you're going to be working on stuff. And this is the flow that's going to be. And so we did the best we could with, 600 square feet or whatever it was. And that worked pretty well until they got to the point where they could afford to move into a 3PL and grow.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, my first e-commerce brand, I was just shipping all the product myself. Had one of those like little brothers label printers,
Yeah.
and every morning and night I'd be making sure I spent time labeling product. That's how it goes sometimes, and it's fun. I think it's a good way to start because you understand every little piece about the supply chain and your product and your customer experience. So I admire that. And, as they say, right? So since they were bootstrapped, they couldn't afford to advertise themselves. And so they partnered with media outlets like Outside Magazine, Art of Manliness. And, these media outlets had a great fit with their ICP, with who they were targeting. And, if you look at kind of the journal section of their website, you'll see topics today like how to take style inspiration from the cast of Yellowstone, which I love that show. So that one definitely resonates with me. Or how this surfer built his dream house on Nova Scotia coast. And I think it's just a pretty unique way of branding in terms of they really take this aspirational approach to connect with their ICP, which isn't often done by brands. I mean, how often do you see a brand website, have a journal really where they're sharing these stories?
Yeah.
So I love it.
And what I think it's so good about that is it's just in those two headlines that you read, everybody exactly knows who their aesthetic is. Everybody knows exactly what the brand is. And so they've done this way to communicate who their ICP is in a way that everybody gets it. They're not just saying, we want people who look for adventure, 25 to 35, making this amount of money. Like, they have literally talked about this. And so, I think it's a masterclass, and there's no surprise why they've had the success they've had.
Yeah. And I think this kind of was a really rooted market strategy, right? So they kept working with kind of natural and organic ways to grow, mainly by establishing good partnerships. So as they said, like, our own marketing strategy is very relationship based, meaning that it all comes down to relationship between us and our affiliates and us and our customers. And so I think it's a really, different way than just, hey, let's spend money on Facebook and, Instagram and these other paid media platforms. And, they had great partnerships with Outside Magazine and the Art of Manliness that, mentioned their names in different articles. And that partnership has been longstanding and really, helped them grow. And then they set up a ambassadors program that, eventually got them a lot of growth on their own website, where they had ambassadors representing Huckberry, all over the country and world on their ventures. So, I mean, I think it's pretty incredible strategy, right? I mean, it really helped them kind of get going in their early days.
Absolutely. And they were very much DTC for a long time, but eventually they launched into brick and mortar. And I think it was 2018. And they opened their first store in NYC. And again, just because they've got this ethos of testing and then getting into it, they launched in the pop-up store format. Have you ever done one of those?
I mean, I've been to one. I haven't done one.
I was at a company that did one once, and it was interesting because you basically just lease this space for a month, and you kind of build it out, and there it is. And it's a high traffic area. And it was an interesting point, but it was a good way for them to start to have something for somebody to come to. And what they had done is they wanted to curate this sense of adventure in the store, and so they were suggesting gear for, this is when you're horseback riding, this is when you're mountain climbing, this is when you're heli skiing, or whatever it's going to be. And so I think where I see a lot of these pop-up stores do well is when they think about it as an experience versus more of a retail channel. And it's something where you are getting people to share on Instagram. It's more of a viral piece that way. But they were really focused on making sure that they were finding people that fit their vibe. They talked about how this is, weekend warriors to the folks that want to go out and do something. And it's just really the key thing there. But despite this retail launch they've done, D2C has always been the core piece that drives their business. What were some of the unique levers that they pulled?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the creativity, right? So, as you look at the data behind Huckberry and their emails, their customers open their emails 5 times more than their competitor emails. So it goes to show they really, focus on creativity, because I think to have that open rate and read through rate is super impressive. And I think it goes to show, like, if customers aren't necessarily interested in the products, they're interested in the actual stories and creativity of the company. And so I think that just drove a ton of loyalty and retention, right? And so I think, unlike most startups, Huckberry's has been very, like, acquisition focused, right? So they've made, I think, 2 or 3 acquisitions in the past. What was kind of the idea and thesis there?
Yeah, that is one of the things that stuck out to me as well, is they've been buying customers that were best sellers on their website. So again, they have this aesthetic, they are attracting these people in there, and they sell not only their own products, but they start to allow other brands to be on there and partner and to take a piece of it. So they started to be a bit of a mini aggregator starting in 2016. And they said, all right, let's look at folks that fit our ICP that are already selling on our website, and let's just buy them. And so the first one was Flint and Tender, which was acquired in 2016. I wasn't familiar with this brand, but it was one of the highest grossing apparel Kickstarters of all time. And they had a really strong following. They were known for quality. They had a 10-year guarantee for quality for those sorts of things. And so that was the first one they did. And then 2 years later, they acquired Wellen in 2018. And they've got about 10 years in the premium beach lifestyle space with Wellen. And so they've put a lot of effort into the data and analytics, into understanding their customer, understanding their site. And so they're looking at how to bring more of these brands in there. What you're talking about with the creativity is they're sending 3 emails a week roughly. And that's giving them a lot of data into what customers are interested in, what they're opening, what they're clicking on. And that will influence their broader strategy with their brands for what to sell, right? If they talk about the Yellowstone thing, okay, cool, that's obviously in the zeitgeist. Let's lean into Yellowstone. But we see that jackets are more popular, or maybe we're going to do boots or jeans or other things that may be coming out of that. And so they've done a really good job there. And we've talked a little bit about how they don't manufacture themselves, but what are some of the unique merchandising choices that they've made?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they offer just a high quality selection of men's apparel, footwear, and gear designed for both urban and outdoor lifestyles. So you can think, apparel wise, jackets, shirts, pants, shorts, footwear, boots and sneakers and sandals, and gear like watches, bags, knives, outdoor essentials. And they're best known for their best selling product, which is the wax trucker jacket. And that is completely manufactured in America. Um, and so I think besides offering a curated list of products, they also generate a lot of content, right? I mean, as I looked at their website and look at their social media page, content is just such a key here. And so it's not just the written format that we talked about on their emails, but also video, right? I mean, you go on their social and they've got a ton of engaging photos and videos that I thought was really well done. I mean, so it's, I think, a key part of their brand strategy and product strategy to not just sell themselves as a product company, but really as a company that's trying to get people outdoors. So I thought it was super well done, and Huckberry is a lot bigger than I thought it was. I mean, so the financial milestones are pretty incredible, right? So 2011 they launch, 2012 they do $1 million in revenue, 2016 they acquire Flint and Tinder, and they do an estimated 4.4 million in revenue. 2018, Wellen is acquired. 2019, they do a venture round with Finn Capital Partners for 6.3 million, and they're estimated to do 70 million that year in revenue. In 2020, they do 158 million in revenue. So pretty incredible growth. And I mean, I would imagine during COVID too, they grew quite a bit as well. I mean, just hearing those revenue numbers, and we can put the source in the show notes in terms of where we got those numbers, but it's pretty incredible. I mean, 2020, that article on capitalism.com is where we got the 158 million number, and I was just amazed to hear that. I mean, it's really just incredible.
I agree. I mean, they probably have come down or about the same sense, and just given where e-commerce has been. But to go from a $20,000 investment to several $100 million in revenue cumulative is pretty amazing. So they've clearly struck onto something that was very interesting. When I dug into their supply chain, we talked about how they are doing a good deal of U.S. manufacturing, but they also import a lot from the normal suspects in the apparel space. A lot of those imports seem to be linked to the brands that they own versus some of the other brands that are just sharing the website. So I think they've got some consolidated warehousing and things like that. Asia is a major sourcing hub for them, as one would expect. But they also do a decent amount in Europe, particularly Italy and Portugal, two major apparel manufacturers. And the last year, they've been doing a lot of importing around footwear. And so that definitely seems to be an area that they're growing more in.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because on one hand, they've got these brands that they're sourcing for globally. On the other hand, they've got, a solid supply chain in America as well. We talked about the wax trucker jacket. That's their best seller, uh, completely sourced in America. So, I mean, I think it's a balanced mix, right? And I thought from like a exit standpoint, right? I mean, they haven't really hinted about any sort of like exit strategy if they want to go public or get acquired by a larger brand. We haven't really seen from our research like buyer interest, but I'm sure there is, quite a bit just given the size of the company and the loyalty to the brand. So, I mean, I'm curious, Aaron, what was your kind of take on exit strategy here?
Well, I think that I love it and totally celebrate when people find their life's work, their life's passion. It's possible they don't want to sell because they don't want to do anything else, and that is so special and so rare. And I think that that's awesome. Eventually, they'll have to think about succession and what they have there. So I think about their ability in terms of their assets. First and foremost is going to be their brand and the media engine that they have, that they already have people who are reaching out to, want to tie into. And so no matter what, you've got to make sure that you continue to feed that and curate that. Second, obviously, is the brands and the manufacturing piece they have, which is an interesting piece there. And I think the third is just the financial resources they have, in the sense that they haven't taken on very much money relative to where they are. I mean, they were bootstrapped up until very recently. And the thinking here is that at some point they are going to need to look at, what do they want to be? Do they want to continue to be on this aggregated piece? Are they happy with where they are? And it's just a matter of, let's be profitable and continue to be the best. It's hard to say a $200 million company is a small company, but the best small company that we can be. And so I love the optionality. I love the key things there. But what are some of the main lessons that you've got from Huckberry?
Yeah, I mean, I think create content and build loyalty, right? I mean, I bet you their repeat purchase rate is much higher than most brands. I bet you they've got a lot more loyalty and a lot more kind of just customer attention than most brands, right? I think they've just done such a good job curating content and really resonating with their audience compared to just, running Facebook ads that we see some brands do. So, I mean, to me, that was the big takeaway of being content centric and just really trying to find those angles that will better resonate with your customers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, they have done such a great job of finding things that are interesting that it's almost like the sales are an afterthought, right? Like the stuff that they're putting out, essentially, that's why people are opening up their emails 5 or 10 times more often than what's there. And the way that they've built their business in such a way that they are being paid by their customers before they have to pay their vendors is such an amazing working capital unlock. And so they've done a great job there, and certainly a great one to study. That one that I personally wasn't super familiar with before we did this, and I'm glad we dug into it.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's amazing. Well, I really enjoyed this episode of E-commerce on Tap, brought to you by Sourcify and Izba. We've got a lot in the pipeline before the year is over. Check out the Aura Ring episode. That is definitely a highlight, especially given their recent fundraising announcement. And we appreciate you tuning in. Leave a comment, a review. Let Aaron and I know what you think about E-commerce on Tap on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we'll hear from you next time. Thanks again for tuning in.